Welcome back to the show. I'm so honored that you've decided to spend a few minutes with us here today. And we're very honored to have a sponsor for today's episode, officerprivacy.com. Did you know that 98% of the home addresses of law enforcement professionals are exposed online, meaning everybody can find out where you live with just a few clicks of a mouse? So officerprivacy.com has the answer. I'm also a member. It's been tremendous for me and my family. If you believe in officer safety, you should also believe in officer safety at home as well. Check them out at officerprivacy.com. I am super excited about today's guest. Today's guest is Justin Carlson. He's a former detective and owner at the Carlson Solutions PI firm. He's the founder of Failing Justice, one of the best podcasts dedicated to the criminal justice system that you will find. And Justin is also at the tip of the spear when it comes to a balance of justice and individual rights. I'm really excited to have you here, Justin. How are you doing, sir?
Travis, I'm good, man. I am, and I'm honored to be on the show, man. I appreciate that.
Man, I've been intending to get you on for a while. You've been a busy guy. I love your background. I love what you do out there. We're going to get into all that. But before that, I mean, obviously you have a background in law enforcement. You're doing things in the criminal justice system now, including your PI firm. You do background checks for agencies, for pre-hire, super important work. But what got you interested in law enforcement? Tell us a little bit about your career.
Yeah, so I actually started when I was 18 years old. I come from a background of law enforcement. The only active member of my family still in law enforcement now is my uncle, but he's a chief deputy in Smith County, Texas. But I come from a background in law enforcement. My aunts, both my grandfathers, my dad, he was law enforcement for a little while for the undercover narcotics and for Arkansas State Police. And so I just grew up around it. You know, I was that kid that watched cops on TV. I was that kid that went up to the jail, got to ride in the back seat of patrol cars, which, you know, you got to question the parenting on that of how unsanitary that is. But I grew up around it, man. And then my dad became a preacher, so I'm also a PK. But, you know, I think for a while my dad probably wanted me to go in the ministry, but I wanted to be a cop. And so when I was 18, I started my career in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex at the Bedford Police Department, and I just worked in the jail. I knew that, you know, from the time I was 18 to 21, I had to work in the jail. So I did 3 years in the jail, which was most certainly a good, solid foundation for when I went to the police academy when I was 21. And so then I graduated the police. I was 20 actually, but I graduated when I was 21. And then I hit the streets running, man. I was where I wanted to be. I knew that was my place. And of course, over the years, I grew up through the ranks, you know, went into CID, worked in, did some white collar stuff for a little while. Then I went into major crimes where I specialized in child sex crimes, child physical abuse, and then eventually went on to do homicides. And I did some administration time during those years, but I did a total of 15 years. I stepped away for a little bit, came back. I wasn't quite certain and sure of myself when I stepped away. I wanted to dip my toe back in and try again. But then I realized, you know, I was better off in the private sector, which is where I'm at now. And I do a lot of, I like what you said. And when you introduced me, to me, that was a very accurate introduction. I believe that I have a well-balanced, I'm very well-balanced when it comes to the criminal justice system. I'm also, you know, a lot of people think if some people listen to some of the things I say, especially police officers, they think, oh my gosh, this guy doesn't like police. But that's the furthest from the truth. I mean, some of my best friends are still cops. I love police officers. I love law enforcement. But like you said, I also have on the other side of the scale, I believe in individual rights and the Constitution, and that law enforcement should behave. So I do. I love the way that you introduced me and put that when you said that. I feel like I am pretty well balanced. But in short, in a nutshell, that's kind of how my career played out.
Well, it's so interesting, Justin, because if you care about law enforcement, then you want to have the best law enforcement you possibly can, right?
Yeah.
We do so much. We listen to people that don't know anything about this profession that tries to fix us, right? And of course, they just throw these ideas on the wall. And anybody living in America in 2024 knows that didn't work, right? We have a recruiting crisis, a retention crisis. Our crime rate, especially our violent crime rate, despite what Washington, D.C. tells us, is completely out of control because they conveniently let the FBI not report about 50% of that violent crime for this election year politics. And so everybody living here understands that. And nobody's really pinpointing why that's happened. But part of the reason that's happened is because we are listening to people outside the profession that are demanding us to get better. And we're just listening to them versus us who know how we can get better. And you touched on it. We should be constitutionally focused on the mission, focused on not just customer service, but individual rights. And you can do all of that and fight crime at the same time. And you very fortunately are sort of a lone voice to some of that. Why do you think you've gotten some of that backlash you talked about?
Well, to make another long story short, there were some things that I faced when I was working major crimes. And those people can go listen to my podcast if they'd like. I won't tell the whole story, but there was some corruption that fell in my lap. And, you know, I was actually at the time, man, I was your soldier. I was the guy who just showed up, wanted to do a good job, wanted to put bad guys in jail for doing bad things to children, and murdering people. And so when this stuff fell into my lap, I was just, man, I was flabbergasted. I didn't know exactly how to handle it. And then when I tried to handle it the right way and give it to the people that should have taken it and done the right thing, they didn't. They tried to cover a lot of it up. And so that's kind of what opened my eyes to the other side of the criminal legal system. So that's when I decided to get out. And when I was able to leave my agency, again, it wasn't something I wanted to do. I thought I was going to be a cop for the rest of my life. And that's, but I believe that, there's a God above who puts pieces in place for a reason. And I think this was my journey. But when I decided to leave law enforcement, I feel like I had more of a voice, right? And which is crazy when you think about that. It's totally backwards. You should, even if you're in law enforcement, you should be able to speak on what's right and what's just, and not be in fear, of your career being lost and character assassination and service credit assassination. But that's besides the point. When I left, I started speaking on these things, which is what prompted me to start Failing Justice. And that was kind of the long way around to get to what you asked me. But why do I think I received some of the backlash? Because it was during that time that I received. I mean, I still receive backlash to this day, but it was during that time that it was really heightened because I was exposing those that were police officers, that were police administrators, for malfeasant behavior, things that shouldn't have been happening. And those that were attached to those police officers, those that were attached to those administrators, it ended up all being political in the end. Everything's got to be attached to something political, but the backlash was because I was speaking of hey, this is not okay. We're police officers. The public puts their trust in us, and we are supposed to be good stewards of that trust. And yeah, man, I mean, I just think that it's so backwards because the police officers, those in law enforcement, are the ones that are supposed to be doing the right things. And we see it all the time thanks to social media. So often they aren't the ones that are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that transcends not just corruption and misconduct. I mean, that transcends into, I mean, look what your platform's built on, leadership. I mean, you've been on my podcast. We've talked about this. That transcends just not just corruption and misconduct. I think everything begins with leadership, because if you have poor leadership, then you open the door for everything else, such as misconduct and corruption, and the list goes on, and it trickles down.
Yeah, I'm going to make a statement that may be surprising, but I don't think we have a corruption problem. I think we have a leadership problem, because bad actors in any profession is not unique, right? You could name the profession, you have bad actors, but how do leaders deal with that? That's the answer, right? We're not looking for a perfect profession. We're looking for a profession that deals with bad actors, whether it's the school teachers or the ministers and the scandals all over the CEO world we know of. Well, how do you deal with that? And typically organizations get destroyed when they don't deal with it properly. I think most people understand, Justin, hey, I don't expect perfection, but what I do expect is leaders do what leaders need to do when that imperfection occurs. And so what you just described to me is, we talked to a lot of guests that deal with what you dealt with, is you were disillusioned at some point in your career when you thought this career was full of great, courageous men and women doing the right thing at all levels. And you went face to face with cowardice, right? But you did something that so many don't do. And I want to sort of dive into the bottom of that. You didn't know this was like a podcast on psychology, but I'm so curious on why you're a unicorn and why you rose up, you confronted it, while everyone around you put their head down as those loyal soldiers and just kept moving. So what is it about you? And by the way, before we get to that, I'm going to come back to that. I want to sort of tell our audience I don't know what happened to you when this happened, but I talked to so many people that has been through what you've done when they stand up to cowards. So cowards have some elements and ammunition at their side. They have internal affairs. They have fellow soldiers that will assassinate your character, your reputation, and they'll use their internal affairs unit to literally try to destroy you, combined with character assassination to get you out of the profession. So when you confronted this, did the investigation start almost immediately on you?
Well, so I was a little bit smart, actually. I read the writing on the wall. I knew. So this was, when I say it was political, it was so political. I mean, we're talking district attorneys, judges, police chiefs, district judges, county judges, mayors, city council. I mean, it was so embedded. And at the time, I had no idea. But in summary, they were trying to put a kid in jail that shouldn't have been in jail. It was a case that I worked, and the kid that they were trying to lock up. I did not implicate that kid in my investigation because I believed he was innocent, and I had several things to corroborate that. So the mom of the kid that they were trying to lock up had a friendship with the mayor, and all these other political parties, all these other public officials, they didn't like that relationship. And I didn't know this was going on, man. Again, I'm just the guy investigating.
You're just doing the case, presenting the evidence, and expecting everybody to do the right thing.
Had no clue. And so once I saw how big it was, I decided, okay, I have two choices. I can sit here and I know what's going to come if I do something while I'm still employed, because I knew exactly what was going to happen. Or I could leave. And so over a period of, I did go toe to toe with the DA. I did go toe to toe with the DA. And that's what started. That's when I knew that something was eventually going to happen, because the DA had the power. Again, this is the same DA, by the way, that has upheld Robert Robertson's execution warrant in Texas right now. But that's besides the point. I decided that I needed to leave. So over a period of 3 or 4 months, I started formulating my own plan. and that plan was to start a business in the private sector. And I had to do it cautiously and carefully, but I did do that. And I left. I put in my 2 weeks notice. They had no clue it was coming. They had no clue I was building my business. But I wasn't going to let what happened go, because they were trying to lock somebody up that was innocent. And so I put in my 2 weeks notice, and they let me work my 2 weeks notice, every bit of that 2 week notice. And when I left, pretty much immediately is when I began to stand up. I created Failing Justice. I created the podcast, and I started putting these things out there. And, you know, that wasn't necessarily fun either, because, you know, I was trying to find a place to reserve. I was trying to find an agency that would hold my license. And my current agency that I had just left from, going back to character assassination, they were trying to discredit my service record, which, you know, was, you know, I wasn't perfect, that there wasn't anything in there just absurdly, just anything egregious. And so that's when all the attacks really began. I felt like I didn't want to endure that while I was at the agency.
Well, what cowards do, Justin, I'm sorry, just to interrupt you briefly, that's the coward's playbook, right? Because you're right. Yeah. If you wouldn't have resigned, they were going to go after you, whatever. And listen, people may be listening to this that aren't in the profession that don't understand this. If I'm behind your car on the highway, I can follow you until I see something wrong. Turn signal, weaving within the lines, right? Mm-hmm. I can, if I look at somebody long enough, I will find a little shred of evidence to come after you. Well, that's what they do to law enforcement, right? So they were going to find whatever it took, even if they had to make it up, to get you out of the agency. You saw that coming and you left. But the ironic thing, we hear this a lot. We just interviewed Steve Friend with the FBI, or former FBI, who's same thing, same description. After you leave, it's not good enough for them because they're worried about you, what you're going to say or do. They'll go after you as a person, as a character, and they want to try to destroy future employment. And so that's what cowards do. And people that may be listening to this, they'll thinking that could never happen to me. Well, Justin, you never thought it was going to happen to you. Steve Friend, you never thought it was going to happen to you. Hell, I teach about this all over the country. I thought it would never happen to me. It happens all over the place when you stand up against these cowardly tyrants, right? And they are a sleeping giant inside too many organizations. And you saw this firsthand.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I knew what was going to happen had I stayed, and so I planned my exit strategically. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I knew. I mean, I put up enough fight while I was still there to let them know I wasn't going to accept what was happening. And there were little things, you know, change of assignments, you know, things like that started happening. But man, I was cautious. I was cautious because I had seen it time and time again. Again, it had never happened to me, but I had seen plenty of colleagues in my own agency and across the country that it happened to. So I knew what was going to take place, and that's why I planned my strategic exit. And you know, to this very day, you know, there was a time, man, when I was doing this, there was a time that I thought I was going to be indicted.
Yep, they use that. They do that as well.
And that was a very scary time.
And Justin, let me just interrupt you. I'm sorry, one more time, because I want to describe to our audience how that happens. Here's how you can indict an innocent person. Here's how I could indict Justin Carlson right now today. I simply write up an affidavit on everything that Justin supposedly done. I never interview Justin, so I never have Justin's side of the story. And I present that affidavit to the district attorney or a grand jury about everything you've done, and they're going to indict you. And yes, chances are you're going to have to pay a pretty good hefty price to get a good lawyer. The things that they've got to show that evidence in trial to convict you. They're not going to be able to show that evidence. But by the time that 2 or 3 year time period went through, and you have to go through a public trial, even though you're found not guilty, which likely would happen if you actually didn't do it, they've destroyed you during that time period. That's how you indict innocent people from a law enforcement standpoint. And if it's happening to law enforcement, as I speak, there are multiple people I know that did nothing wrong, were arrested or indicted and prosecuted by their own agency. Do you not think that happens to the general public? Of course it does, right? And you found that out. Now, that's not to mean that this is a common thing, but let's be honest here. We just talked about the imperfection of people. There's only been one perfect person that walked this planet, and they don't work for your police department. I can guarantee you that. This occurs. And so that's why you need courageous men and women at these agencies like yourself to stand up to this, because we will never root this out. I don't care what pledge or program or what school your chief went to. We have imperfection inside agencies. That's not the question. The question is, what are we going to do about it, Justin? And in your case, a healthy organization with a healthy culture, what should have happened when you brought this to their attention?
Yeah, I mean, you said it, a healthy culture in these law enforcement organizations across the country. And every now and then you find that unicorn agency, right? I'm sure you know of a few of them. They're out there. They do exist. And I just wonder why it is that it can't exist across the board. And I think it comes back to cowardly leadership and having cowards in these positions of leadership who want to pander to the bureaucrats, their donors. And that's where you begin to have, the lines get blurred. And I completely agree with you. I think at the very end of the day, it comes to having a good leader who will make that organization healthy. I mean, there's always going to be things that pop up in an organization that you have to deal with. I mean, you talked about it earlier. I mean, imperfection, just it's human nature. Anytime you have humans involved with anything, you're going to have the error. None of us are infallible. Like you said, there was only one perfect person that walked the earth, but it's how you deal with these things as a leader that matter. Because look who's watching. You have the general public watching, you have the news media watching, you have your officers watching. Everybody is watching the decision that you're going to make as a leader. And honestly, to me, it's not that hard. It's not difficult. If you're able to pass a state exam, you're able to go to college and get a degree, you're able to put a badge and a gun on and go out and make life or death decisions. You cannot tell me that you don't know the difference between right and wrong in pretty much any given situation. And if you don't know it, ask somebody. As a leader, that's another problem. These leaders, I think they always have the know-it-all attitude. I'm going to make the decision. Nobody's going to tell me how to run my organization. And that's a problem too. There's resources available to these chiefs and these sheriffs and these captains and these lieutenants. But man, I think it, like you said, it just comes down to culture. And in my particular case, what should have happened, obviously, is I should have been able to confidently bring this to the table and say, this is a problem. And I'm presenting it to you. I expect you to handle it with integrity. But that's not what happened. All these people, all these public officials and these local politicians, they were friends outside of work. So much of their get-togethers and parties and alcohol, all this stuff got uncovered. And I uncovered all that, and I connected the dots as to why it wasn't handled or couldn't have been handled properly when I was there. My administration completely agreed with the district attorney, even though they were wrong in that moment, and they knew they were wrong. They ended up eventually dropping this charge on this kid because they knew they were wrong. I told them, first and foremost, I'm not going to show up, and my testimony is not going to reflect what you want it to. And so they ended up dropping it. Again, long story short, but it goes back to the culture. And like you said earlier, I think everything, quite literally everything in law enforcement begins at the top with leadership.
Well, the federal government's got a whistleblower policy, and now they get around that. Steve Friend will describe that specifically. But do you know of any agencies that have an actual policy for whistleblower status? Because this is kind of what we're talking about here. People, you're the only one, I'm going to assume that you were the one of the few that would stand up like this, but most people won't because they fear retribution, right? That's the difference between courage and cowards. Courageous, they know what's right and wrong. Just like you said, they're going to do what's right no matter what. They work with a set of principles where nobody's going to get in the way of those principles. Well, law enforcement is in a state of fear of everybody, particularly their management oftentimes. I don't want anybody to get the impression we're talking about all agencies. Of course we're not. Right. You're an idiot if you think that, but we need to talk about the agencies that are like this, or we're never going to solve this issue. And with you, just like you, Justin, people get upset at things I say. I get canceled. I was canceled from 2 conferences this year, and because they didn't want to hear this type of thing, which I'm like, good. If you don't want to hear from me, then I know I should never come back to your conference because I know what you're about. And because I want to know right up front, and they don't want to solve it. You don't talk about the problem, you don't solve it. So, would that not make a strong statement as a leader if you took a bold stance and implemented a policy to protect people like yourself that wanted to see corruption? Because we do that when it makes the leaders look good, right? Oh, we have a whatever they call it. You can interrupt use of force at any time and stop it. If you don't do it from a backing officer and stop this excessive force that you perceive to be excessive, then we're going to discipline you. Well, what about the chiefs that do things like this to you that may not be on a body camera, but they're even more destructive oftentimes? What if they would take the bold stance to implement an actual policy to protect people like yourself? Would that not send a message?
No, yeah, it absolutely would. Now, I don't just sitting here thinking right off the bat, there's no agency that comes to mind. Obviously, I'm not going to say that doesn't exist, but there's no agency that comes to mind, number one, that I know of currently, or number two, that I have ever heard of. You do a lot more traveling and go to a lot of agencies. So maybe you have that insight and that knowledge. But as of right now, I don't know of an agency that has the whistleblower policy. So, I mean, of course, at face value, everybody likes in these piddly handbooks and these SOPs that you have at these organizations and at these cities and these counties, it'll obviously say, yeah, you can come report, but Travis, in my experience, you can't come report. And so, yeah, I think it would make a very bold statement, but a lot of the times, what's crazy is a lot of the times when you go report this misconduct and these things, it involves some of the top people. And, when you have the top people that are involved in the misconduct, then, I mean, that's obviously a problem because, who's going to investigate that, right? And the problem is a lot of these people form these relationships, and so they feel bound by their relationship with each other to overlook some things. And so again, that just goes back to cowards, and that's all that is. And it runs rampant, man. It just runs rampant in our law enforcement agencies today, and it's sad because then you have organizations, one in particular that I can think of. I've had the co-chair on my podcast, the Lamplighter Project. Those are all cops. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but the Lamplighter Project, those are all cops who formed that nonprofit for other cops to be able to come to them when they are whistleblowers. And they help them through a lot of the procedures and processes. But, it's unfortunate that we don't have that built into our agencies.
Well, it says everything that you don't know of an agency, and I don't know of an agency, and most of us just talk. Now, you're right about one thing. You could put a policy out, but the policy is only good it's actually enforced, if it's actually practiced, right? It's like when these chiefs go, "Oh, I have an open door policy." Well, good luck getting anybody coming in your door if they don't, if you've created a toxic culture, right? But they love to check the box and say that. So I'm not talking about a check the box policy. I want to just challenge our listeners. We have chiefs, we have sheriffs listening to this. You need that policy. You need to assure your people that you will root out corruption, and we will send you a model policy. We will send you the ideology on how to do this. One of the things that we like to advocate is anonymous phone numbers, right? Like I can report something anonymously. Well, you let citizens report things anonymously on your officers. Why would you not let your own officers report things anonymously? And I know people are going to go, "Oh, this is going to create chaos." No, it won't. You'll know real quick whether it's somebody playing a game or trolling or it's accurate, right? But you have to actually get that information. And so I don't think I'm going to have a string of emails people wanting to do it, but that's a problem in the profession. And that doesn't mean that we think all these agencies are horrible. It just means that if you don't have these instruments in place, what does that say about you, right? I'm not sure how to answer that. We have a lot to fix in the profession. And listen, that's why we both do what we do. We may do it from different angles or different platforms, but we both want the most professional law enforcement is out there. And by the way, listening to insane people with purple hair has not done it for us. Trust me, if it did, I would be advocating for it, but that's not going to work. Just look around. Yeah. You're doing that now, and that doesn't work. And so we need some of these instruments of accountability in place. And that seems to be very easy to do, right? And the fact there has to be a nonprofit that exists to take care of these whistleblowers is shocking. It should be shocking in any organization. I would just submit this to you. If any private company didn't have this type of policy, that would be well known. People would be outraged by that, right? And so the fact that we don't have some sort of effort to do this is pretty surprising. And so I think we have more things to talk about, Justin. I want to get back to a question I asked you several minutes ago because it's really important. I think I know the answer because everybody I ask this question gives me the same answer. Why are you different? What made you stand up? Because I want to express this to our audience, how difficult this is to do. You stand up and nobody else stands up with you. That's a pretty isolated thing to go through. And there's trauma involved in that, whether you want to admit it or not. This profession was not what you thought it was. You know, we're all recruited in this profession of God bless America, red, white, blue, good versus evil. But you don't realize the evil sitting across from you at a squad table. And, but what made you stand up when everybody else sat down? What is it about you specifically? Because I'm obsessed with this and the characteristics behind this. What was it about you specifically that made you do the right thing when the costs were tremendous?
Well, here's the thing, Travis. You know, the reason I know this happens, and it's not isolated, and I know that it happens in many places. You know, this happened to me twice, actually. I had told you that I got out of law enforcement for about 2 years. I had a very successful private business. I made $250,000 in a year and a half, and that's not law enforcement money. Like, that's money that I was like, what is going on? But I didn't have a sense of purpose during that time. And that's what made me say, I only got out. Let's be clear here. I thought, and I tried to convince myself that I got out because I was tired of law enforcement. I wasn't tired of law enforcement. There were some things that, working child sex crimes for 5 years in a row, that'll take a toll on your mental health. But I was convinced, and I told everybody that I was just tired of law enforcement. But the fact is, I got out because I wanted to expose some serious corruption. And then 2 years later, I sold my private business and I got back in law enforcement, which is right around, you met me when I worked at my last agency. And, man, there was a lot of things going on there, misappropriation of funds. And I'm just like, what is going on right now? You know, why am I faced with this again? And a lot of those people who dislike what I do say, well, problems just follow you. And I said, I guess that's maybe one take.
Well, it's not an
again,
accurate take. That's
no,
a take of people with their head in the sand, right?
I'm a believer that all things happen for a reason, and that maybe I was meant to go to this agency because when I started exposing these things at this other agency, now I did at that agency, I took a different approach. The city manager was somebody that I felt that he was going to handle things properly, and so I took it to him. I took it all to him. I had receipts in my hand, and they covered it up. I mean, covered it up with a heavy wool blanket. And I wasn't accepting of that. I didn't accept that. And so I told them I didn't accept that. They fired me. I was actually fired from that agency. And that lit a fire under my rear end because it's the first time I'd ever been fired. It was an experience. I assure you, it was an experience. And 8 weeks later, uh, that fire under my rear end led to that chief getting the chief that fired me. He got fired because of everything that I was trying to show them, but they covered it up. And then um, what happens when you cover things up? It starts to seep out. And so, my point is, I tell that story to kind of lay a foundation to answer your question. I don't know exactly what it is about me. Um, there are a few things. I just find it that when I raised my right hand, just as you did, and so many of the others probably listening to this podcast, and took an oath. And I know this sounds so cliche. I'm not trying to sound noble. I'm not trying to just I'm just this big courageous person. But man, I take that serious, and I equate it to a child. We have children, we have young children, and those children, whether they know it or not, trust us to look after them. And it's the same with law enforcement. We're put in those positions. Leaders are put in those positions. Chiefs, sheriffs, street cops, jailers, judges, district attorneys, you name it. All of these people are put in these positions. They're positions of trust. And like I said earlier, we are supposed to be good stewards of the trust of the public. And when that is violated, it just doesn't sit right with me. Because it that's not it's just not okay. And it just doesn't sit right with me. And so maybe God put that in me just to be the kind of person that I am. Again, I'm not, I don't like to think more highly of myself than I should, but I just, I believe God built me for that. I don't know why, because you're right. It does feel sometimes like you're on an island, very lonely. But some of the encouragement that I get, and you know what's crazy about this too, Travis, is a lot of the encouragement I get are from active cops who inbox me. They're too afraid to put something on a public comment section, whether it be YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, Instagram, you name it. I get a ton of inbox messages, emails saying, "Hey, I'm a cop in Maine. I'm a cop in Michigan. I'm a cop in Virginia. I found your podcast. Man, we appreciate what you do." Or even a lot of cops from my two previous agencies. And you know why that is? It's because they're in fear that if
Yep.
they come out in support of what is right and what is just, then they are fearful that they're going to lose their jobs too. And that is nothing short of disgusting, in my opinion. Nobody should have fear lingering over them that they're going to get fired or demoted or written up or have any kind of hardship at work because they stand up for what's just and what's right. And I don't know if I directly answered your question, but as tough as it is, I look at my journey and I know that God put me in this position for a reason, and I've seen the fruits of that labor.
Justin Carlson, you did what is the purpose and mission with us here at Courageous Leadership. You put that coward out to the rest home, and that's what we want to do with all of them. We want to eradicate the cowards in this profession. I'm honored you came on the show. I'm so thankful for what you do. How can people reach you? How can they listen to the podcast? Kind of give them all that tidbit of information.
Yeah, so you can go to failingjustice.org. That's where all my information is. There's podcast links for YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast. We're pretty much on all the major podcast platforms. So failingjustice.org, and then carlsonsolutions.net, which is my private investigations firm. If anybody needs private investigations or background checks for their law enforcement agency, we have a team of guys that former detectives that work on those. And so carlsonsolutions.net or failingjustice.org is how you can reach me.
Well, earlier in the show, we talked about some easy actions that courageous leaders can do, which is to implement a whistleblower type policy, even anonymous reports for corruption or bad dealings inside an agency. But let me encourage them to do one more action item, and this just brought it to mind, because obviously background checks are extremely important. I think it's even more important to have a third party do those, Justin, because then if something happens down the line, they don't accuse the agency of, missing something. There's been plenty of reports on that, and of course the trouble that comes with that. And so having an independent agency do that is important. You do that. But the other thing that local law enforcement typically doesn't do is, believe it or not, the federal government does do this in law enforcement. They do background checks every 5 years on their employees. And I haven't heard of an agency, unless you're in narcotics, do that. And that seems to be odd to me, because when you hire a 21, 25-year-old kid, they have one background, but when they're 40, they have a different background. And we tend to just hide our eyes and ignore all of that. I think it would be extremely important for law enforcement to do these background checks every 5 years. That's the federal standard. If you want to push that to 10 years, that's one thing, but at least do multiple background checks. And you're not doing that because you think your department's full of these bad actors. You're doing that to get left of bane, to get left of a problem, right? And then do not just to get people in trouble, but maybe people need help, right? That's part of caring for your department, caring for your officers. And so that is also something we should start doing. And I would assume, Justin, your company would do that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you do make a good point. You put somebody that's green behind the ear, 21 years old, be a police officer, 5-10 years later, they may be 2 divorces under their belt and just PTSD ridden from no telling what they faced when they were a police officer. And again, not to scare the police officers or make them feel like they're in trouble, but I think you made a great point. There's so many officers out there, and they're not just afraid to say anything about misconduct, but a lot of them are afraid to say anything. And I'm sure I've listened to your podcast. Y'all talked about this plenty, about their mental health. So there's plenty of reasons to conduct periodic background checks. Again, whether you say 5 years or 10 years, that is something that we would do. And our team that does the background checks, we're all certified to do those checks. I did them as law enforcement officers. So we all know what we're doing and how to do it and what law enforcement agencies expect. And so if there's anybody that needs that background check that is a law enforcement agency, reach out to us, whether it's 1 or 50, we can accommodate it all.
Excellent. Justin Carlson, thanks so much for being here. And if you've been listening, thank you for spending your time with us. And just remember, lead on and stay courageous.